Alright guys, so World War I's over. Now let's talk about between the world wars. Okay, so a lot of different changes are going to take place in the 20 years between the two world wars from about 1919 to 1939. So Europe after World War I is going to be pretty much completely devastated because you've had so much bombing and it's really bad at this point. So a lot of these different European nations are going to be destroyed and bankrupt after those years of fighting, particularly along the Western Front. Russia, like I said, bowed out pretty early in the war and was pretty much destroyed after World War I. And it's going to have a 3-year civil war that's going to lead to communism, the formation of the Soviet Union. We'll talk about all that stuff in my next video. You had the Italians who were really angry when they didn't receive land along the Adriatic coast. They're struggling. You have the harshness of the Treaty of Versailles, which we'll talk about in my next video. It's going to create a lot of business in Germany who was unable to pay reparations. And then in Europe, you have the war that led to a sense of bitterness and pessimism amongst the nation. So just a lot of tension still happening after World War I. So a lot of those horrors and just different terrible things happening in World War I is going to really change people's attitudes about progress. So after the war, people started to really question traditional beliefs and just like, why do things work the way they do? Like, just trying to deal with such a terrible time in history. So one of the big people that you have out of this in-between stage is this guy named Sigmund Freud. Those of you who are taking psychology next year definitely are going to want to know who Freud is. Probably one of the main people you will learn about in psychology. And he really revolutionized this idea of psychology and how the mind works. And he really believed that the mind has a conscious and a subconscious and these different thoughts that affect how people behave. We also have Albert Einstein's going to rise, who's going to really revolutionize the idea of physics. All of you will be taking physics next year. You may want to know who Einstein is. And his different theories on light, relativity, and energy is going to really disprove a lot of those theories by Isaac Newton way back in the day and his discoveries in the 1600s. So Einstein's just going to continue to advance. You're also going to have a lot of new abstract art by this guy named Pablo Picasso and his idea of Cubism, as well as Salvador Dali's Surrealism. And it's going to go against a lot of those traditional art forms that we've seen in the past. Just more of this modern art, with some of this weird stuff. Salvador Dali especially, with these clocks. I went and saw some of his paintings when he was like, they were doing like a traveling thing where they were showing some of his paintings around the world. And like, it was kind of cool just to see it. It's very different from that old form of art that you might think of. So as far as America after World War I, they're going to go through a lot of changes. After World War I, they're the wealthiest nation in the world, and this huge power that created this thing known as the League of Nations, they didn't join it, but they were a part of it. And the League of Nations is basically the predecessor to the United Nations. We'll get all into that later on. And then you have Japan, which gained a lot of wealth by selling supplies to the Allies. We talked about that video during imperialism, how they really increased its position as the strongest nation in Asia, despite being that small country. And then while these European nations are going to really struggle to rebuild and pay for the war, some of these world nations are going to really benefit from World War I. So after World War I, the United States is going to enter this period known as the Roaring Twenties. And again, I'm not going to go too much into this stuff because you're going to spend a whole bunch of time on this next year. But basically, it was just a really happy, fun time in U.S. history. So you had like mass production in factories. It's going to lead to a lot of new consumer goods, high wages for workers. People are going to be a lot happier. You're going to have a lot more people just socially, like, continuing to develop as a country. You also have like things like electric appliances, radios were really popular, the rise of jazz music. Americans really enjoyed themselves in the movies and sporting events at jazz clubs. It's just a happy time to be an American. And the U.S. would use a lot of that wealth also not only to help themselves with being social and enjoying themselves, but also to help those European nations help trying to repay their debts and rebuild after the war. The Roaring Twenties, though, is going to eventually come to an end in 1929 when the stock market crashes, you have banks fail, and you have a high unemployment. That's going to lead to this time known as the Great Depression, which again, I'm not going to get too much into because you guys are going to spend so much time on this when you get to U.S. history next year. But this depression in America is going to really trigger this worldwide depression in the 1930s because as a result of that stock market crashing in America going into decline, international trade is going to really decline. And new investment in Europe is going to really end. U.S. is really going to hurt the rest of Europe. And this depression is going to lead to a sharp rise of unemployment, not only in the U.S., but also in Europe, too. In Germany, in particular, it was really bad. They probably got it the worst of anybody. And by the 1930s, you had this government in Germany known as the Weimar Republic, and that Weimar Republic is going to grow more and more unpopular. Mostly because they signed that Treaty of Versailles, which we'll talk about next video, that was just really unfair to Germans. And like Germany, You also had the Italians, who also were really struggling. They felt betrayed by the treaty, and they had this suffering economy. I really saw an unemployment rise. In Germany in particular, unemployment was about 30% of the country. So about 1 in 4 people would be unemployed at the time. I mean, even worse than the United States Great Depression, and that's pretty terrible as well. You're also going to have this time of inflation. So the way inflation works, let's say that you want to go buy yourself a bag of bread. Instead of being $1, it's going to be worth like $20. And you'd see these people coming in with these wheelbarrows of cash, because it's not like you could put it on a credit card. Credit cards did not exist then. No. You had to bring in cash. So people would be bringing in literal wheelbarrows filled with cash just to pay, because the prices of different goods would be so high. And due to this economic depression, you had a lot of bitterness, a lot of desperation. People wanted answers. People wanted to get out of their poverty. And because of that, you're going to have these powerful dictators that are going to start to rise, particularly in Germany and Italy. And those dictators can play an important role in World War II. And you can see some of their pictures. Again, it's something we're going to be getting into, but this is when we'll start talking about Hitler and Mussolini. Okay, we're going to spend a whole lot of time on them, though. But that's all I have you guys on this video. I'll see you guys next time. Bye.